What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with a 100% spoiler-free review for Hokum from writer-director Damian McCarthy, which I saw last night at an early access screening down at the Alamo Drafthouse. And I'll just come out right and say it. I think this is the most frightening horror movie I've seen this decade. It is relentlessly scary, punishing at times, and I quickly lost track of how many times I felt those evil chills that one only experiences when enjoying an incredibly well-crafted horror film. And there were even two moments where I kind of growled and started grinding my teeth into like a fine powder because I was trying to prevent myself from screaming like a fucking lunatic in public. In short, I loved it.
Demons do exist. It's just people with closed minds. Can't see them.
It's an easy frontrunner for what I think will end up being my favorite movie of the year. This is Damian McCarthy's best movie to date, and if you're an Adam Scott fan from any of his many shows and movies from the last 30 years, prepare to have your admiration intensify. He's fucking incredible in it. But just in case this movie's not yet on your radar, here's the official premise from IMDb. A horror writer visits an Irish inn to scatter his parents' ashes, unaware the property is said to be haunted by a witch. And if we want to be completely vague and spoiler-free, that'll kind of get the job done. But what I'll add, and I'm speaking in general terms about caveat, oddity, as well as hokum, what's interesting about Damian McCarthy's horror movies, there's never just one threat that you have to worry about. A lot of horror films make the mistake of saying, oh, we got the one ghost in the closet, and now we're all going to be scared, and eventually we'll get rid of the ghost in the closet, and the movie's over. In all of Damian McCarthy's work, there's always like different tiers of threats or plot threads or adversaries or bad guys where he kind of seamlessly weaves together some thriller ingredients like violent deeds committed by regular human beings, as well as whatever supernatural ingredient might be part of the equation. And I think that's a key component to the spells that Damian McCarthy is crafting with his movies. And at the risk of sounding like a total hopeless Dungeons & Dragons nerd, Damian McCarthy is a sorcerer when it comes to the horror genre, because I think he understands better than anyone the pacing and the various tricks and the various techniques you can employ to create the emotion of fear. There are plenty of horror movies out there that are gross and they're gory and they're shocking, but very few horror movies through sleight of hand and misdirects can make you feel unimaginable, unbridled terror. And I think right now there's not a director on planet Earth that can hold a candle to Damian McCarthy when it comes to actually creating the emotions of dread, suspense, and fear. He really has like perfect control over his framing and his pacing and his editing.
One of the members of staff is missing.
What do they think happened to her?
Go home. Well, you still look like your passport picture.
Where he takes your nerves and your heart to the breaking point where sometimes I was thinking to myself last night, you know what? Maybe I've had enough fun. Like, maybe I can't take any more of this. And I deliberately did not review the movie last night when I was kind of buzzing around like a moth in front of a bug zapper, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. But as a lot of people know on this channel, I am prone to hyperbole. Whether I'm praising a filmmaker or criticizing a filmmaker, I can be a little over the top in my various proclamations about their work. But with that acknowledged, stick with me here. Damian McCarthy's given us 3 horror films in the 2020s, and I love all 3, but I think Hokum is by far the strongest of the bunch. But quick pop quiz for all the horror enthusiasts out there. Name the last time a director gave us 3 really strong horror movies back to back in close proximity to one another. And on that very short list of directors, I would include people like Todd Browning in the late 20s and early 30s, James Whale in the early 30s, or John Carpenter in the late 70s, David Cronenberg in the late 70s and early 80s. But long story short, it's a very short list of directors who've been able to create several great horror movies in a row. Like there are some directors out there where they might make like one good one like every 10 years or so. And while Damian McCarthy's career might go back to 2009 with some of his short films, in the 2020s, between 2020 and 2026, he's given us 3 incredible horror films. So not only is he my favorite director within the horror genre right now, he probably is my favorite new director to emerge in the 2020s if we're judging him exclusively by his feature films. And I understand that there'll be some cynical film connoisseurs out there who will say, movie culture has been so weak lately, you're basically dying of thirst. And when you're dying of thirst on a desert, any water will taste good. And fair play, there's definitely something to that. The 2020s has been more or less a weak decade when it comes to filmmaking. However, as far as glasses of water go, this water tastes particularly good. And when it comes to watching horror movies in the history of the horror genre, I've always been inclined to throw out a very wide net. Whether a movie was made in the 1920s or the 2020s, or whether it was made in Japan or Italy or America, and name any place on Earth, name any period on Earth, if somebody makes a good horror movie, I want to see it. But if you're a fan of folklore or local myths and legends and haunted houses and witches and that sort of thing, I think Hokum's going to be right up your alley. And it'll compare very favorably to any horror movie you care to mention from the 21st century, because it's not trying to be like the next French Extremity, and it's not trying to be the next Sam Raimi movie or David Cronenberg movie. It's not trying to imitate the work of Tobe Hooper or any great horror director that you care to mention from any era. It's not trying to replicate or recreate those beats, which a lot of horror movies do. Where you watch a horror movie like Lee Cronenberg's The Mummy, you're like, oh, you like The Exorcist, you like Evil Dead. I can see all your influences, and I love those movies too. But Damian McCarthy is just trying to make Damian McCarthy movies, and they are unlike any other ghost stories or folklore stories that I've come across in a very long time. And what I noticed last night while watching Hokum is that it scared me so many times and conditioned me to expect scares so many times. I started getting little miniature heart attacks even during the pump fakes. And that's very rare. Like, we're all used to like a jump scare and you go, oh, and then it's kind of over. But this movie had me like kind of coiled up in a ball, like anticipating and expecting the next big shocking moment to such a degree where even when the camera would like whip pan or show a reverse angle and there'd be nothing there, I would still get evil chills, and then I would feel this relief. And that's incredibly rare. And if you really want to know how powerful Damian McCarthy's horror movies are, when I was rewatching Caveat and Oddity recently, what I was amazed by was that I would still feel those emotions even when I already knew what was going to happen. I was watching Oddity 2 nights ago, like at 2 in the morning, and early on in the movie, for people who have seen the movie, there's a jump scare involving a tent and a face coming into frame. And I screamed so loud that I thought my neighbors might honestly call the cops. Like, I know I woke up. I live in a building. I'm 6 floors up. I'm surrounded by neighbors. I know I woke a few people up, and they were annoyed as hell. But my scream, it was one of those like deep guttural, like, oh, like growling and like roaring. And then I was like, ooh! I had to kind of stop myself because you can't just scream in the middle of the night in New York. People will call the cops. And I immediately turned the volume down. I was kind of waiting to hear if there'd be like any banging or anything like that. But that is the kind of fear and terror that Damian McCarthy knows how to instill in an enthusiastic horror fan like myself. And as far as Caveat goes, I first saw it like a year and a half ago, and still all this time later, every once in a while, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll look at the doorway to my bedroom, and I will still think that I'm seeing one of the how can I say this without spoilers? There is a very scary shot toward the end of the movie where I will imagine I'm seeing that in my home. So that's the kind of lingering effect that his movies can have. But I think the real secret to Damian McCarthy's movies is that he's not just giving us like, interesting technique from his bag of tricks, and somehow he keeps expanding that bag of tricks. But none of these horror ingredients or kind of bells and whistles and effects would have any emotional impact of any kind if we didn't care about the characters. And Adam Scott in this movie, let's just say this, you'll be shocked and amazed by just how hard you can root for a guy who is an unapologetic son of a bitch. And Adam Scott, he's given us a wide array of different performances over the years. I think the first time I saw him was in Star Trek First Contact, 30 years ago, where he's like, "Sir, it's the Enterprise," and it's like a big inspirational moment.
Prepare for ramming speed!
Sir, there's another starship coming in. It's the Enterprise.
I think that was the first time he popped up on my radar, back when I was in college. But every once in a while, whether he's in a comedy or a show like Eastbound and Down, he does have a dark side. And I prefer Adam Scott when he leans into the kind of mean, sarcastic side. And this movie gives him abundant opportunities to embrace just being a cold-hearted son of a bitch. And yet, he goes on this emotional journey over the course of the movie where not only will you find it incredibly emotionally moving and satisfying by the end, you'll find yourself over and over again surprised by just how hard you're rooting for this guy who has very few redeeming qualities apart from once again, no spoilers, but he's got one goal in mind. That's probably his one virtuous impulse that he's felt in a very long time, because he's suffering from some deep-rooted guilt over some past actions, which the movie explores. So you can kind of understand how he became who he became. But between Damian McCarthy's incredible screenplay and Adam Scott's performance, you're absolutely going to fall in love with this character. And let me just say that again. Damian McCarthy wrote this movie. There are a lot of great horror directors out there where if they find great material, like a great book or whatever, they can put it up there on the screen. Damian McCarthy is a writer-director. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record. If you are a talented young writer-director out there anywhere in the world and you want to tell original stories, you don't want to do reboots or requels or sequels or extensions of any kind of something that was cool a long time ago, the horror genre is your home. The horror genre allows people to tell fresh, original stories. And you can do, like, look at Ari Aster. He did 2 horror movies, and now he's off doing, whatever kind of ambitious art house movies he wants to make. Damian McCarthy has given us three horror films so far, and who knows what the future might hold. I don't know. I would have thought after Caveat and Oddity that he would have said all he had to say when it comes to the horror genre. Hokum shows that he had considerably more to say and considerably more to offer because now he's got more resources at his disposal and he's absolutely blooming as a filmmaker. But as a movie lover, I crave fresh, original storytelling. And luckily, there are companies out there like Neon that are creating an environment where Damian McCarthy can put his best foot forward and give us some of his best work. I hope that Neon and Damian McCarthy will work together for a very long time. So as you've probably gathered at this point, I'm very impressed by Damian McCarthy's skills and talents as a storyteller. But he's not a one-man band. He's got some good crew working alongside him. So let's talk about some of his key collaborators. Joseph Bishara is the composer on this, and he's a seasoned pro at this point. He's done scores for movies like Insidious, The Conjuring, Malignant. He's no stranger to the horror genre, and I don't believe he worked on the previous... Hang on, let me just do a quick check. Yeah, he didn't work on Oddities. So this is a new collaborator for Damian McCarthy, and they worked together hand in glove. He did a fantastic job with the score to this movie. Cinematographer, I'm always a little iffy about Irish names, but it's spelled Colm Hogan. I believe it's probably Colm Hogan. I think that's the way an Irishman would pronounce it. But his cinematographer, he also worked on Oddity as well. What I love about Damian McCarthy's horror films, there are a lot of static shots where the camera's on a tripod and just they have like total command and control over the frame, where somehow just by showing you a still, stagnant image, you're like, what am I going to see back in the shadows? But they are amazing collaborators. They work together incredibly well. But if you like smooth, controlled, beautiful images where you feel like the filmmaker is in total control over every aspect of what you're seeing on the screen, between Damian McCarthy and Colm Hogan, they are an excellent team, and I hope they'll continue to collaborate on future films. But I also need to give a shout out to editor Brian Philip Davis, because when it comes to horror as well as comedy, timing is everything, and if you're off by a fraction of a second, a scare or a joke can completely collapse. Or if you improve it by a fraction of a second, a scare or a joke can be magnified considerably. And in the interest of full disclosure, after my review for Oddity, Brian Philip Davis reached out on X and was like, hey, thanks for the kind words about the film. We're very proud of it. And I was like, dude, Oddity scared the shit out of me. Brian, if you're listening, Hokum really scared the shit out of me. I'm almost 50 years old. I would have thought my ability to be frightened by movies would be far back in the rearview mirror. Hokum really got under my skin. And so when it comes to these spells that I alluded to earlier that Damian McCarthy is casting with his movies, in the absence of great editing, the spells would be impossible. So yeah, Brian Philip Davis, if you're listening, the movie was so frightening that I think between the damage done to my nervous system and to my heart, you very well might have shortened my lifespan on this planet. I walked out of the movie limp and ragged, but at the same time thrilled, because I so rarely get to have a great movie-going experience. And obviously, the editing is a huge part of that equation. So what else can I say without going into spoilers? Let me have a quick glance at my notes. Oh, I wrote this down as I was heading home last night. I was very proud of this observation. For people who are thinking about a trip to Ireland and what they might experience over there, I think Damian McCarthy, who is an Irish filmmaker, between his 3 films that he has made set in Ireland, he's doing to Ireland what John Borman did to the South when he made Deliverance in the early 70s. There are some people who have never been south of the Mason-Dixon line ever again after seeing Deliverance. So you know what? I don't want to squeal like a pig. I'm not going to Georgia. I'm not going to Alabama. I'm not going to any of those states. They've avoided the South like the plague for more than 50 years because Deliverance was just that traumatizing. Like, I don't want to be Ned Beatty. Like, I'm just staying west or I'm staying north. I think there's a very high likelihood that some government official who works in like tourism in Ireland is going to say, Damian, can you just make a movie about New York or Tokyo or someplace other than Ireland itself, because you're making Ireland seem like the most terrifying place on planet Earth. Although he shoots it so beautifully that it also makes it look like the most stunningly attractive country on Earth. And I've been to Ireland a few times. I went in 2008 for a business school trip for an elective. And I went in 2022 to visit a few film locations and these documentaries we made for the channel, directed by Robert Amara, called Once Upon a Time in Ireland. And I'll leave a link to those 2 videos down in the description below. But not only is Ireland an incredibly photogenic country, it's also one of the most warm, welcoming, just friendly countries that I've ever visited in my life. I don't know if I've ever experienced better hospitality in my life than anyone you might meet at a pub or a restaurant. Everybody just seems to be thrilled that you're here in Ireland, that you're there in Ireland, visiting their country, and you have a quick pint, you introduce yourself, you have a quick conversation, tell a few jokes, and then you move on to talking to the next person. But Ireland rules, and I strongly recommend everybody go there. However, if you go to Ireland, maybe don't watch Damian McCarthy's trilogy of horror films first, because you will be terrified to step outside your hotel room. Although even there you're not safe, because Hokum takes place entirely inside a hotel. So every weird noise you hear, you're like, oh my God, it's the witch coming to get me. Also, speaking of physical beauty, I have to give a shout out to actress Florence Ordesh, who plays the character of Fiona in this movie. Everybody's going to completely, totally fall in love with Fiona within 5 seconds watching this movie. She plays a fantastic character. The entire supporting cast is really good. Will O'Connell as Albie, he's great. Who else do we have? Peter Coonan as Mal, David Wilmot as Jerry. But yeah, the ensemble cast is fantastic. But at this point, I feel like I've said so many complimentary things about the movie. We need to have one criticism just to keep this video honest. I don't think it's a problem yet, but this movie uses more jump scares than Damian McCarthy's previous 2 movies. And how we define a jump scare, it can be a little vague and it can be a little broad, but obviously if you have alarming sound effects and music, you're trying to create a jump scare. And some jump scares work great, like Psycho has some jump scares. Like, no one's going to criticize Alfred Hitchcock for including jump scares in Psycho. As far as jump scares go, they're really effective in this movie, but sometimes they can become a crutch, where whether you're watching a trailer or a mediocre horror movie, in the absence of actual skill and talent in terms of telling a story, they will kind of, it's like the easy way out. You use a jump scare to make the audience think they're having a frightening experience, when in actuality, it's just a jump scare and they're just getting a jolt. The jump scares in this movie, they will have you recoiling in your seat. But in reality, I'm more impressed by a horror effect or a moment of dread, where just like if you're seeing a still image and you see like an apparition stepping into frame, very slowly, and you're still like, oh no. And there are a few moments in this movie where there are slow horror effects, that dawning horror that creeps its way up the back of your neck. For me, it's much more satisfying than a jump scare. But if you prefer jump scares, well then yeah, Hokum's gonna scare your pants off. But now that I'm thinking about the different kinds of scares that this movie offers, what's interesting about some of the scares that lean more toward like the slow dawning horror, this movie is not a one-trick pony. I think a lot of horror movies make the mistake of having one kind of horror effect over and over and over again. There are a few horror effects in this movie that are sad. And I think if you can work in other emotions into your horror, it makes them all the more dramatically exciting and memorable, where they just have a different impact. It's one thing if you're like, oh no, what's going to happen? It's another thing when you learn about something that happened in the past, and when you're hearing something or seeing something, like in your heart, just like you feel this deep swell of pity for a particular character. There are 1 or 2 moments in this movie where you will feel so sad for what happened to certain characters that it's going to have a major emotional impact on you. So once again, while this is a scary movie, it's not the only emotion at play, which I think is part of which was a big reason why at the end of the movie, I just felt like I'd had a complete meal. It was an incredibly satisfying movie-going experience. So yeah, I think that's about all I can say. So long story short, my favorite movie of the year. Who knows? Maybe The Odyssey will bump it out of its spot. Maybe Dune Part 3 will bump it out of its spot. But if they don't, I'm totally fine with saying Hokum might be the best movie experience that you can see in 2026. It just fucking rules. And Damian McCarthy, he's one of those filmmakers where he keeps getting better. And he was already really good. If he just stayed at the level of Caveat and Oddity, he would have remained my favorite director in horror. But he leveled up between this last 2 movies and now. So yeah, it was an incredible night at the movies, and as somebody who's always looking for and craving great movie-going experiences, but very rarely finding them in the world of new releases, I went home with a very big smile on my face, a very satisfied movie fan. So yeah, check out Hokum when it goes wide next week. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, becoming a subscriber. Hope you enjoyed my rant, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.